Hello and welcome to the October 11th, 2017 edition of the self-hosting/HA breakout meeting for SIG Cluster Lifecycle. Let's see, we had started talking briefly before the recording about surge updates. I see that Aaron is now here, so maybe we can continue that discussion. Aaron, do you know if Diego is going to show up also?
I don't know that he's going to be able to, but also Ryan Phillips is on the call, who has been following that process as well. He might have some more info.
Yeah, so I was just mentioning to Tim that Brian gave a comment on the issue last night saying that he didn't think we should add it effectively. And Tim and I were talking about the fact that we had chosen to use daemonsets for the master components, but maybe we should reassess that decision in light of Brian's comment. So I guess there are sort of two paths forward. One is to go talk to Brian and Kenneth and try and get SIG apps to actually add this feature if we think it's the right way to move forward. And the other option is to see what other features we can use, from deployments or a different type of controller for the master bits.
What's the TLDR for or do you have a link to it that we could put into the doc? Also, I don't see the notes on the doc right now for today's date.
Yeah, I haven't pulled that up yet. Hold on a second.
I haven't been following the daemonset PR.
I think the main contention right now is how to deal with host ports in this update strategy. And then coupled with the fact of wanting to move all workload APIs to stable in 1.9 or to GA in 1.9, this complicates that potentially.
I think that's probably Brian's primary motivation.
I mean, I can talk to, like, if we're considering alternatives. I mean, we can cover how we've handled it with deployments. They're not the cleanest way, but it works.
Well, the original motivation behind using daemonsets was to get around the scheduling snafu that existed with not having the taints be schedulable when the network wasn't there yet, right? And I believe that's all fixed now. It's all exists or is in place. So I don't know if that condition, that was the primary driver behind choosing daemonsets. I don't know if that's still a constraint that we actually have anymore.
Yeah, I think that got resolved. I haven't checked specifically. It didn't affect us with BootKube because we install the networking daemonset, kind of we just shove everything in at the same time and kind of wait for it all to resolve. So I think it was with kubeadm, the phased approach kind of complicated that a little bit. But the stuff that we've run into with using deployments is essentially you want these components to be spread across nodes in an HA situation. But if you're kind of bootstrapping into a single node, or it happens that they all end up on one server, it's actually pretty common for that to happen. You want to start using anti-affinity rules on your deployment. So you're saying, okay, well, I want scheduler controller manager to spread across my master nodes. But when you do that, if you do a required anti-affinity, then you're back in the situation where if you have a single master, upgrades in place don't work because it can't schedule the replacement pod onto the same host, and then it just doesn't proceed. And we've gotten around that with a little bit of kind of finagling with how with like selectors versus labels, and then also the anti-affinity. And so essentially our anti-affinity allows pods of the same object but different versions to coexist on the same node, but it won't allow pods of the same version of the same object on a node. So during an upgrade, we create a new deployment that has a label that changes so that it'll be, even though it's the same component, technically it's the scheduler, let's say, it'll be able to be co-located during the upgrade process, but after that, it'll spread it across all masters. And this is purely to get around the situation where we want it to be the same process essentially for a single master case or a multi-master case. This isn't an issue in multi-master.
So to take a step back, this is the conversion of using deployments, but daemon sets, the only problem that I'm aware of that exists is if you have a daemon set of one. If you have a daemon set of more than one, this problem doesn't even exist at all, because it doesn't matter if you kill the one that's there and start a new one. It only matters when you, for a daemon set of one on the upgrade. So it's a special condition.
Right.
So I think we're doing a lot of rigmarole and workaround for what is essentially going to be a single one-off case, which we already actually have in the code to handle. So I want to talk with Lucas to verify that, you know, the one-off code that we've written for upgrading of a single node, we might want to maintain for a longer period of time, but the daemon set solution works fine for most HA scenarios where you go to zero and come back, because you will have multiple controller managers and they'll just bounce. And you'll have multiple schedulers and they're also bounce, and you'll have multiple API servers and they'll just reload balance. So I don't see a problem there other than the one node scenario.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely for one node. I guess one comment on what you said, Tim, was that we have workaround code right now. Do we actually have upgrade code in the self-hosting case, or only upgrade code in the static pod case?
We have upgrade code in the static pod case.
Right, which doesn't have the problem, because you can just put the new static pod in place, right? And you know it's going to start.
Yes. I'd have to think through the scenarios here where you might want to do a sort of the conversion scenario, right? Where if it's a single node and you're doing an upgrade, it's on the machine type of process, right? So kubeadm could do all the work for, you know, doing A, then B, then C in that order for the upgrade process. But this problem goes away again once you actually have high availability.
The other
Go ahead,
Aaron. The other thing that, you know, like, we're speaking about this in terms of upgrades, but ideally, you know, it being self-hosted, you want to change a flag on your scheduler or controller manager, you're going to edit it, and that's the same process as an update. And so if we're saying that this logic of being able to safely update lives in kubeadm, the tool, like, that becomes the only mechanism of like making those kind of changes to that component. Unless someone's really careful about how they do it, which isn't the end of the world, but it is a little bit unfortunate, and you do lose a little bit of the kind of benefit of it being self-hosted.
So basically, it makes it really easy to shoot yourself in the foot.
Do we want to? I mean, this is where we start to get into policy questions, right? Like, do we want to recommend self-hosting in a single cluster scenario? Is that a wise thing for folks to do?
I mean, I think that there's enough options here that I want to continue to say yes. Like, we do it today and it works, but there's like, that's where daemon sets would have been nice in this case. Another thing that we've kind of internally floated is just writing a babysitter controller that just sits there and all it knows how to do is extract the pod spec out of a deployment object, specifically controller manager or scheduler, if they don't show up in too long, and then it just injects it into the cluster. It's not like the cleanest implementation, and so we didn't actually move forward with that, but that's just another option of just kind of a babysitter controller.
You could just have, it doesn't need to be a deployment. It could babysit the daemon set, right? It could just do whatever and communicate back to the main process.
Right.
That seems totally legitimate too. And in absence of an updated strategy, that seems completely fine to me, because it would just be part of the main initial deployment, right? And it only does one thing.
Yeah, I guess the update strategy to me seems a lot cleaner, because you don't have fragmentation between single master and multi-master scenarios. You're doing exactly the same thing in both cases. It would make it a lot easier to switch between the two, right? If you start out with 3 masters and you decide, oh, I really only need 1, and you go down to 1, unless you add extra things to your cluster to make it sort of safe to run a single master, you are now in a very precarious situation.
So our top priority in the workloads area is to advance the APIs to stable to GA to 1.5. This seems complicated. It's arguable whether we should ever do it, but we should not do it in 1.9. I'm flummoxed by the idea that we have these notions of being able to have feature-gated items to enable these types of things, right? And if it's completely behind a feature gate, I do not understand why this would be a problem.
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if we made it like an annotation or something that got acted on, it might be more reasonable. But if it makes it into the spec itself and that spec is being graduated to GA, that's, I think, where the concern is.
Why don't we do an alpha annotation? That seems completely legit to me.
Might be an option.
Okay, well, I've got a meeting that I've set up with Kenneth, who's one of the leads of SIG apps, and I will see what I can figure out from that side. I was trying to do it yesterday, but he didn't get back to me, so I'll do it today.
I'm going to put a comment there just so I have history behind this conversation of why couldn't this be an alpha feature gated annotation, because that seems like a totally legit path for a bunch of things in the system that are of the same ilk. And that way the API is untouched and cleaner or cleanish, and it provides an exit strategy for what is essentially our nice little Kobayashi Maru.
Okay, I'm not sure if we're going to get much farther continuing to discuss the steps forward in this meeting. I think we have a pretty good notion of what our options are on the self-hosting or on the surge update front. Tim, do you want to give any updates on the checkpointing?
I talked with Dawn yesterday briefly and mentioned to her that it's considered P0 from our side, and I'm talking with Yuju tomorrow. My plan today is, once I finish up some work, to start my rebase and change all the names to Bootstrap / checkpoint, because I don't want to have any more arguments, because the arguments originally started from the generic checkpoint name. And I think for the sake of expedience and just to get things done, I'm just going to call it Bootstrap checkpoint, unless there's any ambiguity that other people care about. So that's my tentative plan. I'll have more updates next week after I talk to Yuju tomorrow. And I should have, there were plenty of comments on the original PR that were legit comments, but most of the work was there. I'll update the PR and go from there and see what Yuju has to say tomorrow.
Hopefully we don't get the same sort of pushback from SIG Node that we got from SIG apps. Both of these are taking a whole lot longer than I thought they were going to.
It always happens that way.
Yes. Well, but we've gotten verbal agreement from both of the other parties about like a very simple scoped implementation that would unblock us, but maybe not, be a generic solution for everybody. And it seems like we've sort of gone off into the woods a little bit.
I think the lesson learned on both of these scenarios is that if we have a limited use case to try and exit strategy through the means that have been defined in the community, such as leveraging feature gates and alpha annotations where possible, versus making things more generic, which is always, it's just a lesson for death by 1,000 needles. So. I was hoping that Lucas might. Do you know if he's going to be out for a while?
I don't know. I had a meeting with him earlier this week where he said like his computer had died, his video wasn't working, and so it seemed like he was having some technical issues that he needed to get resolved.
Right, I'll poke him on Slack too and see what's up. But I wanted to start to get at least resolution on the HA approach that we want to do for the between him and Jamie for the 1.9 cycle.
Yeah, I poked a couple of PRs, and Lucas said he was going to try to get to him later this week, and so hopefully he's able to consolidate the HA design stuff at that time too. Is there anything else people want to discuss? The agenda looked pretty empty. All right, if not, we'll give everybody a half an hour back and call it. Thanks for joining, and hopefully I'll have some updates about the surge updates later today. Talk to you guys soon.